The story begins with a question few dare to ask out loud. What if everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle was only half the truth? Imagine the glitz, the glamour, the red carpets, the global fame, and then imagine a secret that could shake it all apart. You might think you know her. You might have seen her interviews, her speeches, her carefully curated Instagram posts. You might even think you understand the pressures of being married to a prince, the weight of royal protocol, and the endless scrutiny of the media. But what if there was a hidden layer, something so explosive it rewrites the narrative of her life, her family, and her very identity? But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. The air in Buckingham Palace has always been thick with whispers. The corridors echo with stories that rarely make it into headlines. And one such whisper recently erupted into a public shockwave. Lady C, a figure who has remained enigmatic and largely behind the scenes, dropped a revelation that has left royal watchers, fans, and critics alike in disbelief. She said, and the words sent tremors across the tabloids, Archie lives in the UK with his mom. At first glance, it might sound simple, even mundane. But when you peel back the layers, the implications are seismic. This is not just about geography. This is about loyalty, secrecy, perception, and a reality that contradicts every public statement made about Meghan Markle and her family. Now, think about the stakes. A duchess, a global icon, someone whose every move is dissected on social media and reported by news outlets worldwide, confronted with a revelation she could not have anticipated. The notion that Archie, the young boy who captured hearts across the globe, might be living somewhere entirely unexpected, challenges not only public perception, but the narrative Meghan herself has carefully constructed. And let's not forget the timing. This bombshell didn't arrive in a vacuum. The world is already watching Meghan with heightened intensity, analyzing every interview, every appearance, every social media post for meaning. Every moment is scrutinized, every detail magnified. And now, a statement that upends everything people thought they knew. Imagine the panic that might ripple through her world. The public image of Meghan has always been carefully managed, meticulously polished. Yet here is a moment when control slips through her fingers, when a single comment, a single observation from Lady C, has the power to alter the narrative overnight. What does it feel like to be at the center of global scrutiny, to have the world questioning not just your choices, but your very identity as a mother, a wife, a public figure? How does one maintain composure when whispers become headlines, when rumors metastasize into what seems like reality? And yet, this story is not just about Meghan. It is about perception versus reality, about the narratives the media crafts and the truths that remain hidden. It is about the delicate dance between privacy and publicity, between the roles one is born into and the roles one chooses to play. Lady C's revelation did more than make headlines. It forced a confrontation with a reality that had been quietly simmering beneath the surface. It is in that space, between what is seen and what is hidden, between what is spoken and what is whispered, that the drama unfolds. And it is in that space that we find the real story, the one the world is only beginning to understand. Now, pause and think. If Archie is in the UK with his mom, what does that mean for Meghan? For the narrative of her family, the story of her life in the public eye, and for the image she has cultivated for years? This is not a trivial detail. Every statement, every public appearance, every interview takes on a new significance in light of this revelation. Suddenly, questions that were once hypothetical become urgent. Who is protecting the truth? Who is shaping the story? And more importantly, who is controlling the narrative now? The emotional weight of such a revelation cannot be overstated. Imagine the pressure of knowing that your personal life, the most intimate and sacred parts of it, is now subject to worldwide speculation. For Meghan, every action, every glance, every word is now interpreted through the lens of this new information. Every carefully crafted message is now under scrutiny. And the irony is palpable. Someone else's words have the power to dictate the conversation about her life, her child, her identity. The tension is not only external, it is deeply personal. What must it feel like to see the story you thought you controlled being rewritten in real time by someone else's revelation? At the same time, there is an irresistible curiosity that draws people in. Why did Lady C speak now? Why drop this bombshell at this precise moment? What are the hidden motives, the unseen pressures, the tangled loyalties that underpin this story? These are questions that the public, the media, and even Meghan herself are grappling with. And as these questions swirl, one thing becomes clear. This story is far from over. In fact, it has only just begun. The pieces are in motion, the players are aligned, and the stage is set for a revelation that could change everything. And here's the paradox. For all the global attention, for all the speculation, the truth remains elusive. What is public is only a fragment of the reality. Behind the cameras, behind the headlines, there are private moments, whispered conversations, and decisions that no one else sees. And it is precisely in these private spaces that the drama unfolds, where the real stakes lie, where the true story is hidden. Lady C's words have merely cracked open the door, revealing just enough to ignite curiosity, to provoke speculation, to compel the world to watch. So what comes next? How does Meghan respond to this revelation? How does the world reconcile the image of a global icon with a reality that seems to contradict everything we thought we knew? These are questions that demand answers, and the answers, as we will see, are far from straightforward. The tension is palpable, the stakes are high, and the unfolding story promises twists, turns, and revelations that will leave no one untouched. But even as we begin to unravel this tale, one thing is certain: the public is hooked. Curiosity is piqued. Questions abound. And just when it seems we might have a handle on the narrative, another twist emerges, another layer reveals itself, another secret surfaces. The drama, the suspense, the intrigue, it is all just beginning. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. From the very beginning, Meghan Markle was a woman who defied expectations. Even before the royal spotlight shone on her, she was navigating a world that demanded perfection while simultaneously punishing individuality. Born in Los Angeles, a city synonymous with glamour and opportunity, she could have easily faded into the background, another aspiring actress chasing the Hollywood dream. But Meghan was different. She had a presence that drew attention, a combination of charisma, intelligence, and ambition that made it impossible for anyone to look away. People noticed her, on set, at charity events, in interviews, but few could have predicted just how far her name would travel. Early on, Meghan's life was a careful balancing act between ambition and authenticity. She was carving out a career in a fiercely competitive industry, appearing in small television roles and commercials, learning the rules of the Hollywood machine while subtly reshaping them. At the same time, she was becoming increasingly aware of her public persona, understanding that the world would soon expect her to be more than just an actress. Her career choices were deliberate, each one building a foundation for the woman she wanted the world to see. And yet, even in those early years, there were whispers. Whispers about her confidence, her independence, and a certain defiance that set her apart from her peers. Imagine being in her shoes, constantly watched, constantly judged, and constantly required to navigate the delicate line between privacy and publicity. Even before her royal connections, Meghan was learning that fame was a double-edged sword. Every interview, every public appearance, every photograph carried weight. Some people adored her, seeing her as a modern, relatable figure. Others criticized her, finding fault in choices that were entirely her own. She learned quickly that perception mattered as much as reality, that the story others told about you could be as powerful as the life you actually lived. Her early career in Hollywood was marked by determination and strategy. Roles on shows like Suits brought her visibility, but it was her approach off-camera that truly shaped her image. She cultivated relationships with influential figures, volunteered for causes she believed in, and carefully managed the narrative surrounding her public life. She was not naive. She understood that every public gesture, every appearance, every word she spoke was contributing to a larger story, her story, and she was intent on writing it herself. Yet, even as she worked to control her narrative, Meghan was operating within a system that thrived on contradiction. Hollywood demanded accessibility and mystique, transparency and intrigue, humility and ambition, all at once. It was a precarious dance, one that required constant vigilance and a willingness to adapt. For Meghan, every success came with scrutiny, every accomplishment, a potential headline. And perhaps most importantly, every step she took toward building her public image also shaped the expectations that would later collide with the rigid structure of the royal family. There were moments in those early years that hinted at the pressures to come. Stories circulated about her personal life, rumors that were blown out of proportion or twisted by the media. Each misstep, real or imagined, became fodder for gossip columns and online forums. But Meghan was resilient. She learned to navigate the storm, to recognize the difference between meaningful criticism and sensationalist attacks. She honed an ability to present herself with poise and control, even when the world seemed intent on undermining her. Consider this. Meghan's public image was never accidental. It was carefully constructed, a combination of deliberate actions and instinctive responses to the environment around her. From charity work to interviews, from red carpet appearances to social media engagement, every move reinforced a persona of intelligence, independence, and poise. But there was always more beneath the surface. For those willing to look closer, contradictions emerged. Instances where the carefully crafted image clashed with the private realities of her life. And it is within those contradictions that the seeds of future drama were planted. By the time she met Prince Harry, Meghan was no longer just an actress. She was a brand, a public figure with a carefully managed identity. People had expectations of her, often conflicting, sometimes impossible to reconcile. Some saw her as a role model, a progressive figure challenging outdated norms. Others viewed her with skepticism, questioning her motives and authenticity. And amid all of this, Meghan herself was navigating her own understanding of who she wanted to be, not just in Hollywood, but in the world at large. Meeting Harry would amplify everything. Suddenly, the stakes were higher. The spotlight was brighter, the scrutiny more intense. What once was limited to Hollywood circles now reached a global audience. Every word she spoke, every gesture she made, became part of a story larger than herself. And yet, for all the attention and adulation, there was a tension building. A tension between the persona she had meticulously crafted and the reality of life within a family steeped in tradition, protocol, and expectations that could feel suffocating. Even in those early days of royal introduction, the echoes of her Hollywood training were evident. Meghan knew how to handle cameras, how to convey warmth without vulnerability, how to speak authentically while maintaining control over her narrative. But there was something else at play, a sense that no matter how carefully she managed her public image, there were forces beyond her control that could upend it all. The world of royalty was unforgiving, and the lessons of Hollywood, while valuable, could only take her so far. And yet, there was something undeniably compelling about Meghan Markle, something that drew people in despite the contradictions and controversies. Perhaps it was her charisma, her intelligence, her determination. Perhaps it was the way she balanced vulnerability with strength, authenticity with strategy. Whatever it was, it made her unforgettable, impossible to ignore, and increasingly intriguing to a world eager to watch the unfolding story of a modern woman stepping into one of the most scrutinized roles on the planet. But here's the twist. The image the public saw, the poised, confident, and articulate figure, was only one side of the story. Behind the public persona were struggles, uncertainties, and private battles that no camera lens could capture. There were moments of doubt, of fear, of questioning whether the world she was stepping into could accommodate her, her ambitions, and her vision for her life. And as history would soon show, these private realities would collide with public perception in ways that were dramatic, unexpected, and at times, devastating. So, when we look back at Meghan Markle's origins, we see more than a rising star or a Hollywood actress. We see a woman laying the groundwork for a life under extraordinary scrutiny, learning to navigate the delicate balance between public and private, between control and chaos. We see the early formations of a narrative that would one day intersect with royalty, media frenzy, and unprecedented global attention. And we see the first hints of a story that would challenge assumptions, spark debate, and ignite fascination. But what the world could not anticipate, what Meghan herself might not have fully realized, was that the foundations laid during these early years, her resilience, her adaptability, her understanding of narrative, would soon be tested in ways she could never have imagined. And the first major test was just around the corner, waiting to transform the carefully constructed public image into something far more complicated, far more scrutinized, and far more explosive than anyone could have predicted. What came next would propel Meghan from the controlled environment of Hollywood into a realm where secrecy, protocol, and public expectation collided with personal ambition, and the world would watch, captivated, as every move, every word, every decision became part of a story that was still being written. And that is where the drama truly begins, where the real tension unfolds, and where Lady C's bombshell looms on the horizon, ready to shake everything to its core. From the moment Meghan Markle met Prince Harry, the trajectory of her life shifted in ways that few could have anticipated. It was not merely a romantic encounter. It was the beginning of a journey that would thrust her into one of the most scrutinized positions in the world. Imagine stepping from a world you understand, Hollywood, where fame is familiar, where the cameras are predictable, into a world governed by centuries-old tradition, unspoken rules, and an entire media ecosystem devoted to dissecting every move you make. For Meghan, this was more than a culture shock. It was a complete reinvention of her public and private identity. The romance between Harry and Meghan began quietly, away from the prying eyes of the tabloids. They met through a mutual friend, a meeting that seemed casual but quickly evolved into a connection that neither could ignore. Unlike many royal introductions, theirs was not orchestrated by advisors or bound by strict protocol. There was an authenticity to their bond, a genuine curiosity and attraction that bypassed the barriers often imposed by palace tradition. And yet, even in these early, private moments, Meghan would begin to feel the invisible weight of the institution she was about to enter, a weight that would grow heavier with each public appearance, each headline, each leaked story. Think about it. A Hollywood actress entering a centuries-old monarchy. The contrasts could not have been more stark. On one side was a culture that prizes individuality, visibility, and personal branding. On the other was a world of strict hierarchy, tradition, and protocol that dictates behavior down to the smallest gesture. Meghan's understanding of media control and narrative management would be put to the ultimate test. Everything she had learned about presenting herself in Hollywood, every interview, every carefully considered public appearance, was now magnified under the global lens of royal scrutiny. The lessons were familiar, but the stakes were exponentially higher. The engagement itself became a media sensation almost overnight. Newspapers, television networks, and online platforms around the world dissected every detail of the announcement, the ring, the timing, the wording of their statements. Meghan's every action, from the tilt of her head to the color of her dress, became fodder for commentary and speculation. But behind the glamour and the spectacle, there was a profound shift occurring. Meghan was no longer simply an actress managing her own career. She was about to become a public figure whose personal life would be dissected, debated, and often misrepresented. The rules had changed, whether she was ready for it or not. What made this transition particularly complex was the clash of expectations. The public saw a fairy tale romance, a prince meeting a modern, independent woman, a union that seemed both progressive and romantic. But within the palace walls, there were pressures that Meghan could not ignore. Royal family members, advisors, and staff all had expectations, many of which were unspoken. Navigating this new environment required not only charisma and intelligence, but also an acute understanding of social dynamics and power structures that had been in place for generations. Every move she made would be interpreted through multiple lenses: tradition, media, and global public opinion. Even before the wedding, cracks began to appear in the narrative. Meghan faced intense media scrutiny, often framed in ways that contrasted sharply with her own understanding of herself. Stories circulated questioning her motivations, her character, and even her background. Some of these narratives were subtle, others overt, but all shared one common thread. They challenged the image she had carefully cultivated for years. This is where the stakes of entering the royal stage became clear. It was not enough to navigate the institution. She also had to navigate the world's perception of her every choice. Yet Meghan approached this new chapter with a combination of strategy and authenticity. She understood the optics of public life, drawing on her Hollywood experience to manage appearances, interviews, and charitable initiatives. But she also remained true to certain core principles, refusing to be completely molded by tradition. This balance between adaptation and self-expression became one of the defining features of her early royal life, and it would be both a source of strength and a lightning rod for criticism. Consider the wedding itself, one of the most watched events in history. It was a spectacle of pomp, tradition, and pageantry, yet it also represented a significant cultural moment. Meghan's fashion choices, her speeches, even her handshake style were analyzed for symbolism and meaning. And while the world marveled at the fairy tale, there was an undercurrent of tension. Questions about race, class, and modernity intertwined with celebration, creating a complex narrative that Meghan had to navigate with grace and precision. Every detail mattered, every gesture was scrutinized, and every misstep, real or perceived, could become a headline. This transition also marked the beginning of a more profound media narrative. Meghan's life would be covered not only for its royal significance, but also through the lens of controversy. Comparisons to past duchesses, discussions about her background, and debates about her approach to royal duties created a constant cycle of analysis and judgment. For someone accustomed to managing her own narrative in Hollywood, the lack of control in this environment was both shocking and revealing. The lesson was clear. The royal stage operated on a different set of rules, and the consequences of missteps were magnified to an unprecedented degree. And then there was the personal dimension. The adjustment to life as part of a family under constant observation. Prince Harry was a known figure with a lifetime of public attention, and integrating into this environment required emotional intelligence, resilience, and patience. Meghan had to navigate not only protocol and media scrutiny, but also family dynamics that could be as complicated as any public scandal. Miscommunications, misunderstandings, and cultural differences added layers of complexity to an already challenging situation. Every family interaction could potentially be leaked or interpreted through the lens of public curiosity. It was in this crucible that Meghan's strengths and vulnerabilities became apparent. She was undeniably intelligent, articulate, and charismatic, yet she was also under immense pressure to conform to expectations she did not fully understand. Every decision carried weight, every public appearance required preparation, and every personal interaction could be scrutinized. The combination of historical precedent, global attention, and personal ambition created an environment where tension was inevitable, and where the smallest actions could have outsized consequences. By the time Meghan began to settle into royal life, the foundations for future drama had already been laid. Media scrutiny intensified, public debates raged, and internal palace dynamics created a pressure cooker environment. Every aspect of her existence was now public property, subject to analysis, judgment, and reinterpretation. And lurking in the background, ready to disrupt even further, was a revelation that would challenge assumptions about her family, her choices, and the life she had begun to build. Lady C's bombshell loomed like a shadow over this narrative, waiting to intersect with Meghan's story in a way that no one could have predicted. The foundations of public image, carefully laid during her Hollywood years and adapted for royal life, were about to be tested in ways that would challenge perception, create tension, and ignite controversy. And as the world watched, Meghan's every response, every gesture, every statement would take on new meaning, shifting the narrative in ways that were dramatic, unexpected, and, ultimately, unforgettable. But what came next would expose not just the pressures of royal life, but the profound personal stakes involved, and the world would be forced to confront a reality that Meghan had long prepared for, but could never fully anticipate. The story of Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor begins not with headlines or public appearances, but in quiet, private moments that the world would never witness, at least not at first. For Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, Archie was more than a child. He was a symbol of their bond, a living testament to their commitment, and, unknowingly, a lightning rod for global scrutiny. From the moment of his birth, the world's attention was immediate, relentless, and often intrusive. Yet behind the cameras, The realities of Archie's life were far more complex than any public narrative suggested. Imagine being a new parent, stepping into a role as profound as motherhood, while simultaneously existing in the glare of an international spotlight. Every coup, every smile, every milestone would be analyzed. Every decision, from childcare to schooling to even the choice of baby clothes, would be dissected for meaning. It is difficult to overstate the pressure of parenting under such conditions. For Meghan, who had spent years honing her public persona and managing media narratives in Hollywood, the transition to motherhood within a royal context was an entirely new challenge. Here, mistakes were not private. They were amplified, judged, and often weaponized. From the beginning, Archie's existence carried layers of secrecy and expectation. Publicly, Meghan and Harry tried to strike a balance between visibility and privacy. They shared select photos and moments, but much of Archie's life was carefully shielded from the cameras. This strategy was designed not only to protect their son, but also to manage perception, ensuring that the world saw the family in a controlled light, rather than through a chaotic, intrusive lens. Yet even with these precautions, rumors began to circulate almost immediately. Questions arose about Archie's living situation, his schooling, and the extent of Meghan's day-to-day involvement in his care. Enter Lady C. Known for her insight into palace matters and her connections behind closed doors, she made a statement that, while seemingly simple, carried seismic implications. Archie lives in the UK with his mom. On its surface, it was a factual assertion, but the timing and context transformed it into a bombshell. Suddenly, the world was forced to consider a reality that contradicted public assumptions. For many, Archie's life had always been imagined as a straightforward extension of Meghan and Harry's world, an idyllic royal family unit navigating life together. Lady C's words disrupted that narrative, introducing tension, speculation, and a swirl of questions that were impossible to ignore. Why was Archie living in the UK? Was it for schooling? For safety? Or for reasons far more personal and private? And what did this mean for Meghan, who had built a public image of being a hands-on, devoted mother? The implications were multifaceted. On one hand, Lady C's statement could be read as a simple observation. On the other, it carried an undercurrent of critique, a suggestion that not everything was as it appeared. The statement itself sparked a chain reaction. Media outlets speculated, fans debated, and the public's curiosity reached a fever pitch. Parenting under scrutiny is never easy, but Archie's circumstances added layers of complexity. Meghan had to navigate not only her son's needs, but also public expectations, palace protocols, and the relentless curiosity of a global audience. Every choice, from where Archie slept to how he was educated, became a public conversation. And yet, behind the scenes, there were decisions made purely for his well-being, decisions that may never be fully understood by anyone outside the family. In this context, Lady C's revelation was both a disruption and a reminder of the pressures that Meghan faced daily. The emotional stakes for Meghan were enormous. To have a statement made about her child, about her own role as a mother, in a manner that was publicly amplified, was the kind of moment few parents could imagine. It is one thing to navigate rumors about career or public image. It is entirely another to have your child's life become the subject of global debate. For Meghan, this was intensely personal, and yet it was unavoidable. The world had drawn a line around her life, and anything beyond that line, including Archie's experiences, was fair game for speculation. And there were contradictions everywhere. On one hand, Meghan had consistently presented herself as a devoted mother, sharing moments of intimacy and affection with Archie. On the other, Lady C's statement suggested an arrangement or reality that was different from public perception. This tension between image and reality is at the heart of the unfolding drama. For those watching from the outside, the contrast is shocking. For Meghan, it is deeply challenging, a collision of personal and public worlds that she had been attempting to balance since her earliest Hollywood days. What makes this even more complicated is the role of the media. Headlines leapt from Lady C's words, spinning theories, constructing narratives, and often presenting speculation as fact. Social media amplified every angle, turning private family matters into public entertainment. Fans debated fiercely, while critics questioned motives and character. And through it all, Meghan had to navigate the dual role of mother and public figure, ensuring her child's well-being while managing the implications of every public reaction. The stakes extend beyond just perception. Archie's situation touches on loyalty, privacy, and familial responsibility. Where a child lives, who oversees their upbringing, and how parents manage public exposure are intensely personal decisions, but decisions that, in this context, are now subject to global scrutiny. The balance between protecting a child and engaging with the public is delicate, and any misstep can have far-reaching consequences. Lady C's revelation forced that balance into the spotlight, creating pressure, tension, and anticipation for what would come next. And the timing could not have been more dramatic. This revelation arrived at a moment when Meghan was already navigating criticism, rumors, and the complexities of her royal duties. The convergence of these pressures created a crucible in which every decision, every statement, and every interaction would be analyzed for meaning. For Meghan, the question was no longer simply about her image. It was about her family, her son, and the reality that she could no longer fully control the narrative. So, what happens when the carefully curated life of a public figure collides with the unfiltered truth revealed by someone with insight and influence? The answer, as we will see, is a mixture of panic, strategic communication, and private reflection. It is a moment that tests resilience, challenges assumptions, and sets the stage for even greater revelations. Archie's existence, his living arrangements, and the realities of his day-to-day life become the center of a story that is as much about family dynamics as it is about public perception. And yet, even as questions swirl and speculation intensifies, the world remains hungry for answers. How will Meghan respond? What does this mean for her relationship with Harry? How will public opinion shift, and what role will Lady C continue to play in revealing secrets, shaping narratives, and influencing perception? These are questions that hang in the air, unresolved, creating a tension that is impossible to ignore. But what came next would escalate the stakes even further, revealing layers of complexity that no one, including Meghan, could have anticipated. The story of Archie, once private and protected, was about to become a fulcrum around which public curiosity, media frenzy, and royal intrigue would pivot. And the consequences of this revelation would ripple far beyond what anyone could predict. When Lady C spoke, the world paused. In the corridors of Buckingham Palace, whispers travel fast, but rarely do they reach the public in such a direct, undeniable way. Her words, simple yet loaded, carried the weight of decades of insider knowledge and subtle influence. Archie lives in the UK with his mom. On the surface, it was a factual statement, almost casual in tone, but the implications were anything but simple. For Meghan Markle, this was more than news. It was a seismic disruption to a carefully managed narrative, a public exposure of a truth that few were prepared to confront. Consider the context. Meghan had spent years cultivating her image. The devoted mother, the modern duchess, the woman balancing career, charity, and family with poise. Every interview, every public appearance, every social media post had been an exercise in narrative control. And then Lady C, with a single statement, upended the assumptions that had quietly governed public perception. Suddenly, Archie's living arrangements, something previously private, nearly sacred, became a subject of debate, speculation, and scrutiny. The timing of this revelation added to its potency. Lady C chose to speak when Meghan was already navigating multiple pressures: media scrutiny, royal expectations, and the intense curiosity surrounding her personal life. It was a moment designed, or perhaps coincidental, to amplify tension. For Meghan, it was a confrontation she had not anticipated. Imagine the moment you hear, in no uncertain terms, that a private aspect of your life has become public, and that your carefully curated image might now be questioned in ways you cannot immediately control. Panic, frustration, and the need for immediate response are natural, almost inevitable. But what makes this bombshell so compelling is not just the content, but the contradictions it introduces. For years, Meghan and Harry had presented an image of a family united, living together, navigating the joys and challenges of parenthood as a cohesive unit. Lady C's words suggested something entirely different, a reality in which Archie's physical location, and perhaps even aspects of his upbringing, diverged from public assumptions. The tension between image and reality is palpable, and the audience immediately senses the drama. Questions erupt. Why is Archie in the UK? What does this mean for Meghan's role as a mother? And perhaps most importantly, how much of what we thought we knew about Meghan's family life is actually true? The media reacted with predictable intensity. Headlines screamed, social media erupted, and fan forums buzzed with speculation. Some interpreted Lady C's statement as confirmation of long-rumored separations or unconventional arrangements. Others viewed it as a subtle critique, a hint that Meghan's public persona might not fully align with her private reality. The mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and outright sensationalism created a perfect storm. Every outlet wanted to be first, every comment was analyzed, and the narrative began to spiral in ways that were almost uncontrollable. For Meghan herself, the reaction would have been immediate and visceral. To have a personal revelation become public, framed in a way that invites judgment, is the kind of pressure few could endure without pause. Her reaction, private, strategic, and calculated, would be critical not only for managing her public image, but also for protecting her son. Every choice now carried layers of significance. A statement here could calm speculation, or it could ignite further controversy. The stakes had never been higher. There was also a psychological dimension to consider. Lady C's position and influence within the palace make her a figure whose words carry inherent authority. To hear such a declaration from someone with insider credibility adds weight and credibility that the public cannot easily dismiss. For Meghan, it was not just about managing rumors. It was about responding to a voice whose insight could shape opinion, influence allies, and alter public perception. It was a challenge that went beyond media management. It touched on loyalty, strategy, and personal resolve. And yet, the revelation was just the beginning. Lady C's words opened a floodgate of speculation. Discussions about Archie's schooling, daily routines, security, and the logistical and emotional implications of his living arrangements. These were intensely personal matters, yet now they were the subject of global attention. For Meghan, maintaining control over her family's narrative required navigating not just the media, but also the palace dynamics, ensuring that private realities were protected while simultaneously managing public perception. But what makes this story even more layered is the subtle critique inherent in Lady C's statement. The words imply oversight, judgment, and insight that the public had not been privy to. There is an undertone, a suggestion that Meghan's choices, while personal, were subject to scrutiny from those within the inner circles of the monarchy. The tension between personal autonomy and institutional expectation is stark, and it creates a compelling drama that engages audiences on multiple levels: emotional, intellectual, and moral. From a storytelling perspective, Lady C's revelation is a masterstroke. It introduces conflict, heightens stakes, and reframes a familiar narrative. It forces the audience to question assumptions, challenges Meghan's constructed public persona, and sets up a series of consequences that will ripple through her life, her family, and the broader royal narrative. And the emotional impact is undeniable. The combination of surprise, tension, and curiosity keeps the audience engaged, eager to know what Meghan's response will be and how this revelation will affect her son, her marriage, and her global image. And the cliffhanger here is palpable. Lady C has spoken, the world has reacted, and Meghan is now forced into a position of response. Every move she makes from this point forward will be scrutinized, every decision magnified. How she navigates this revelation will define the next chapter of her life, not just in public perception, but in her private world as well. But what came next would show the human side of Meghan Markle, the panic, the strategies, and the private reckoning that followed Lady C's bombshell. And it was a reaction no one outside her inner circle could have predicted. The moment Lady C's words hit the public sphere, Meghan Markle's world shifted in an instant. Panic is a peculiar thing. It can start as a flutter in the chest, a tightening in the stomach, a whisper of doubt that grows into a roar of urgency. For Meghan, someone accustomed to navigating media storms with calculated grace, this was different. This was personal. The revelation that Archie might be living in the UK, separated from the narrative she had presented to the world, touched not just her public image, but her identity as a mother, a wife, and a global figure under relentless scrutiny. Imagine the situation from her perspective. The world now questioned her maternal choices, speculated on her family arrangements, and dissected every prior statement for inconsistencies. Headlines screamed, social media erupted, and opinion pieces speculated wildly, connecting dots that may not have existed. For someone whose life had been managed with strategic precision, this was an unforeseen breach. Every step she had taken to craft a cohesive image, careful interviews, selected photos, charitable appearances, suddenly seemed fragile. The illusion of control was stripped away, and in its place was the stark, uncomfortable reality of public judgment. Panic, in this context, was not mere fear. It was an urgent, consuming response to a threat that was both professional and deeply personal. Meghan had to react, but how? Every potential action carried consequences. A statement could calm speculation or fuel it. Silence could protect privacy or be interpreted as guilt or avoidance. The stakes were amplified by the ever-present media machinery, ready to spin, distort, and sensationalize. And behind all this was Archie, her son, whose life had now become a global conversation. Protecting him while navigating this scrutiny created an emotional tightrope where every misstep could have lasting repercussions. At the same time, Meghan's panic was intensified by the contradictions inherent in the revelation. For years, she had publicly portrayed a united family image. Her, Harry, and Archie navigating life together, celebrating milestones, and presenting a cohesive narrative. Lady C's words introduced a reality that diverged sharply from this portrayal, creating cognitive dissonance for the public and personal stress for Meghan. The gap between perception and reality, always present in her life, had suddenly widened. Every decision, every previous interview, every public gesture was now viewed through this new, unanticipated lens. And the public noticed. Fans, critics, and casual observers alike reacted with a mixture of concern, curiosity, and judgment. Social media threads debated the logistics of Archie's living situation. Headlines questioned Meghan's maternal role. Commentators speculated on motives, timing, and implications. The pressure on Meghan was immense. She was now at the intersection of private family matters and global public scrutiny. Managing panic under such conditions is not only a personal challenge, but a professional necessity, especially when one's life is a brand observed by millions. Yet amidst the chaos, Meghan's response was layered and strategic. Panic does not always manifest in chaos. Sometimes, it manifests in calculated decisions. Behind the scenes, advisors, confidants, and legal teams would have been activated, crafting statements, planning appearances, and considering damage control. For Meghan, every word, every gesture, every public interaction was now a calculated act, designed to balance authenticity, public expectation, and protection of her child. It was a high-stakes dance, where the smallest misstep could magnify the crisis. The emotional strain cannot be overstated. To see one's private life exposed in such a manner, to have choices questioned and motives dissected, is an experience few can truly understand. For Meghan, who had endured years of media scrutiny, the psychological toll was compounded by personal stakes: her son, her marriage, and her global reputation. Panic was not just a response. It was a survival mechanism, a way to process, react, and strategize in an environment where personal privacy was effectively non-existent. Irony, of course, permeates the situation. Meghan, once praised for her composure, intelligence, and modern approach to media, was now confronting a scenario where those very strengths were being tested to their limits. Every carefully managed narrative, every calculated public moment, suddenly seemed vulnerable. And yet, it is precisely in these moments of vulnerability that the most compelling drama emerges, the human side of a public figure, laid bare before an audience eager to witness both triumph and falter. There were also relational implications. Panic is rarely experienced in isolation. Harry, as her partner and co-parent, was undoubtedly drawn into the emotional and strategic calculations. The revelation by Lady C was not just a personal affront. It was a familial and institutional one. Decisions about public statements, responses to media queries, and management of Archie's life were now intertwined with the dynamics of trust, loyalty, and partnership. Every choice had relational consequences, both within the family unit and in the broader royal ecosystem. And yet, amid the intensity, Meghan had to maintain appearances. Publicly, she needed to demonstrate composure, poise, and control. Privately, she navigated fear, frustration, and the urgency of protecting her child. This duality is the essence of her public panic, a constant balancing act between what the world perceives and what is actually experienced. It is a psychological tension that drives both narrative and empathy, engaging the audience with a mix of intrigue, sympathy, and anticipation. The media, of course, amplified the drama. Every subtle gesture, every social media post, every interview snippet was examined for signs of panic or confirmation of Lady C's revelation. In this environment, panic becomes performative, as public figures must navigate not only their internal responses, but also the external interpretation of those responses. For Meghan, the stakes were existential: manage the panic effectively, or risk losing control of the narrative entirely. As the hours and days unfolded, the world watched closely. Fans and critics debated motives, intentions, and implications, while Meghan grappled with an emotional and strategic reality that few could fully comprehend. It was a defining moment, one that revealed both vulnerability and resilience, fear and strategy, private anxiety and public calculation. And through it all, one question loomed larger than any other. How would she reclaim control, protect her son, and navigate a narrative that had been unexpectedly and irrevocably altered by Lady C's words? But what came next would reveal the intricate dance between media manipulation, royal expectation, and personal strategy, a series of events that would escalate the tension and push Meghan to the limits of public scrutiny in ways no one anticipated. If there's one constant in Meghan Markle's story, it's the media. From the earliest days of her Hollywood career to the unprecedented scrutiny of her royal life, the press has been a relentless force, shaping narratives, amplifying rumors, and sometimes distorting reality entirely. In the case of Lady C's revelation about Archie, the media's role became more than just reporting. It became a key actor in the drama, influencing perception, escalating tension, and framing Meghan's reactions for global consumption. Consider the mechanics of modern media. In an era dominated by 24-hour news cycles, social media, and instant commentary, a single statement, like Lady C's, can explode into thousands of articles, tweets, and discussions within hours. Headlines often prioritize shock over nuance, speculation over verification, and emotion over fact. For Meghan, whose life is already under constant observation, this creates a multiplier effect. Every public appearance, every word she speaks, every gesture is dissected, interpreted, and reinterpreted, often without context. A private moment becomes a public spectacle almost instantly. The media thrives on contradictions, and Meghan's story is full of them. On one hand, she is celebrated as a modern, progressive duchess, a woman navigating the complexities of tradition with intelligence and grace. On the other, she is scrutinized for every perceived misstep, every deviation from royal protocol, and every personal choice. Lady C's words provided the media with exactly the kind of material they crave, a story that simultaneously involves family, secrecy, and perceived contradiction. It was irresistible, a perfect storm of intrigue and speculation. Social media amplified this effect exponentially. Twitter threads, Instagram posts, TikTok videos, and discussion forums erupted with theories, criticisms, and debates. Fans and critics alike dissected every nuance of Lady C's revelation, speculating on what it meant for Meghan, Harry, and Archie. Every journalist, influencer, and commentator became a micro-narrator, adding layers to the story, sometimes contradicting each other, often creating a sense of chaos. For Meghan, this was not just public opinion. It was a pressure cooker, a situation where perception could quickly become reality. The press also operates on patterns, and Meghan's life has provided them with plenty. Contradictions between her public persona and private reality, strategic choices, and moments of vulnerability are magnified because they fit pre-existing narratives. The revelation about Archie became a focal point precisely because it resonated with broader stories about Meghan. Independence versus duty, public image versus private reality, and autonomy versus expectation. The media did not simply report. It contextualized, framed, and often weaponized these narratives, turning personal circumstances into global headlines. There is also the psychological effect of media pressure. For someone in Meghan's position, constant observation is exhausting. Every action must be calculated, every public statement weighed against potential backlash. The media does not wait. It moves fast, and often it interprets before verification. This creates a dynamic where the subject must constantly anticipate reactions, manage perceptions, and protect private realities, all while maintaining composure. Panic and strategy become intertwined, as every decision is influenced not only by personal desire, but also by anticipated media framing. Irony plays a significant role here. Meghan, once praised for her media savvy, finds herself in a situation where even her mastery of narrative cannot fully control the story. Lady C's words catalyzed a media frenzy that tested every skill she had cultivated: messaging, timing, public appearances, and social media management. The paradox is clear: knowledge and strategy can mitigate exposure, but they cannot eliminate it. The media operates according to its own logic, and Meghan must navigate it as an adversary, an amplifier, and sometimes an unpredictable force. The international dimension adds complexity. Meghan is not just subject to UK tabloids. She is scrutinized globally. American media, European outlets, and online platforms around the world dissect every statement, every photograph, every action. Cultural differences, journalistic biases, and geopolitical contexts all shape how the story is interpreted, making media management a high-stakes, multifaceted challenge. What resonates in one country might provoke outrage in another, and Meghan's global audience ensures that every revelation has far-reaching consequences. Media scrutiny also interacts with public expectation in complex ways. Fans invest emotionally in Meghan's story, often idealizing her as a symbol of modernity, feminism, or royal rebellion. Critics hold her to impossible standards, interpreting every choice as a reflection of character, morality, or loyalty. Lady C's revelation acted as a catalyst, triggering intense debate and heightened scrutiny. The media becomes a mirror and a magnifier, reflecting public fascination while amplifying tensions and contradictions. For Meghan, every action, public or private, is now filtered through this lens, creating a constant negotiation between reality and perception. The role of the media is not merely passive, it shapes behavior. Meghan's public appearances, charitable work, interviews, and social media posts are often influenced by anticipation of media reaction. Decisions about messaging, tone, and timing are informed by how journalists and commentators might frame them. Lady C's statement added an extra layer of complexity. Not only must Meghan respond to the content of the revelation, but she must anticipate the media narrative that will inevitably follow. It is a multidimensional chess game, where every move carries emotional, strategic, and reputational stakes. And the consequence of miscalculation is immediate. Headlines can misrepresent, exaggerate, or sensationalize, influencing public opinion before corrections or clarifications can be issued. For Meghan, this is a form of pressure that is relentless and unforgiving. Every reaction, even one intended to calm speculation, can be twisted into controversy. Every appearance can be reinterpreted, and every silence can be weaponized. In this environment, panic is understandable, strategy is essential, and the stakes are unprecedented. But the most compelling aspect of the media's role is its unpredictability. Despite preparation, experience, and careful planning, Meghan cannot fully anticipate how each outlet, journalist, or social media user will interpret events. Lady C's revelation exemplifies this dynamic. A single statement, intended or incidental, sparks a global conversation, creating ripple effects that extend far beyond the original words. The media acts as both amplifier and interpreter, creating a narrative that becomes part of the lived reality for the public and for Meghan herself. And the tension does not end there. Every article, every social media post, every discussion thread contributes to the mounting pressure, shaping both perception and response. Meghan must now navigate not only the implications of Lady C's revelation, but also the relentless, evolving media landscape that interprets, distorts, and amplifies every detail. It is a cycle of scrutiny and reaction, anticipation and management that tests resilience, composure, and strategic thinking in ways that few can imagine. But what came next would take the interplay between Meghan, the media, and Lady C's revelation to an entirely new level, revealing how narrative, perception, and reality collide in ways that no one could have anticipated. The stage was set for tension, drama, and the escalating consequences of a story that had only just begun. The royal family is often perceived as a monolith of tradition, protocol, and unity, but beneath the polished public facade lies a complex web of relationships, loyalties, and unspoken rules. Meghan Markle's entry into this world did more than attract global attention. It disrupted an ecosystem carefully maintained for centuries. Lady C's revelation about Archie's living arrangements was not just a public bombshell. It was a mirror reflecting the underlying tensions that simmer behind the palace walls, tensions that few outsiders ever glimpse. Imagine the delicate dance required in a family whose every interaction is scrutinized. The royals operate on unspoken codes, where gestures, words, and appearances carry symbolic weight. For Meghan, navigating these dynamics required an acute awareness of history, hierarchy, and the subtle power plays that define palace life. She was no stranger to public attention, but family scrutiny operates differently. It is intimate, persistent, and inescapable. Every choice, social, personal, or parental, had implications that extended beyond her own household. The introduction of Archie added another layer of complexity. He was not just a child. He was a living representation of both Meghan and Harry, a symbol of their bond and of the future of their lineage. In a family deeply conscious of image, protocol, and public expectation, decisions about his upbringing carried extraordinary significance. Lady C's statement that Archie was living in the UK exposed a private arrangement to public speculation, triggering not only media frenzy, but internal family tension. Questions about parenting decisions, custodial arrangements, and loyalty were inevitable. Behind closed doors, these tensions manifest in subtle and sometimes overt ways. Palace aides, advisors, and senior family members operate with both authority and influence, often shaping decisions without explicit command. Meghan, entering as an outsider, had to navigate these dynamics carefully, asserting her own autonomy while respecting, or at least appearing to respect, the established hierarchy. The revelation about Archie likely intensified these pressures, creating moments of friction where personal desire collided with expectation. Consider the psychological landscape. For Meghan, these tensions were not abstract. They were lived experiences, daily challenges requiring negotiation, diplomacy, and resilience. Disagreements over appearances, security protocols, or ceremonial participation might seem minor to outsiders, but within the palace, they carry weight. When these tensions intersect with highly personal matters, parenting, childcare, and family structure, the stakes are profoundly elevated. Lady C's comments brought these private conflicts into public view, amplifying the pressure and forcing a reckoning. The interpersonal dynamics are equally complex. Meghan's relationship with Harry, while loving, was now tested by external pressures and internal scrutiny. Decisions about Archie, including schooling, living arrangements, and exposure to public life, required coordination, compromise, and mutual support. Every disagreement or difference of opinion became magnified under the lens of media attention. Every decision was potentially fodder for speculation about marital harmony, parenting philosophy, and loyalty within the royal household. Moreover, Meghan faced scrutiny from extended family members whose perspectives were shaped by history, tradition, and loyalty to institutional norms. Expectations of adherence to protocol often clashed with her modern, independent approach. Subtle critiques, passive-aggressive commentary, or unspoken judgments could accumulate, creating emotional strain and moments of isolation. Lady C's revelation intensified these pressures, signaling that even those outside immediate family circles were observing, analyzing, and potentially influencing the narrative surrounding Archie. The tension between private family decisions and public perception cannot be overstated. Meghan's choices as a mother intersected with her role as a public figure and a member of the royal family, creating a constant negotiation between autonomy and expectation. Archie's living arrangements, while grounded in personal or logistical considerations, became symbolic of larger questions. Was Meghan adhering to or challenging tradition? Was she a devoted mother or a figure navigating conflicting demands? The answers, while private, were suddenly matters of public discourse. And then there is the emotional toll. Navigating family tension is exhausting in any context, but within the pressures of royalty, the stakes are amplified. Trust, loyalty, and communication become paramount, yet are complicated by the presence of advisors, media leaks, and centuries-old expectations. Meghan's panic following Lady C's revelation can be understood not only as a reaction to public scrutiny, but as a response to the pressures of navigating these intricate family dynamics, where each action carries weight, meaning, and consequence. What adds complexity is the subtle interplay of influence and control. Lady C's position within royal circles means that her words carry authority, signaling preferences, judgments, or even veiled criticism. For Meghan, every interaction with family members, advisors, and close allies becomes a strategic calculus. Relationships must be managed, alliances navigated, and credibility maintained, all while protecting the privacy and well-being of her child. The stress of this balancing act is intensified by the relentless public gaze, creating a pressure cooker environment where mistakes are magnified and small conflicts can escalate quickly. The unfolding family tension also introduces questions of loyalty and narrative control. Meghan must reconcile her own perspective and priorities with those of Harry, the royal institution, and influential figures like Lady C. Every decision regarding Archie is now symbolic, interpreted both within the family and by the world at large. It is a delicate negotiation where perception can override intention and where private disagreements can become public controversies.